so much of what the future looks like is not just painting a vision of what it means for the next 100 years, but how many people can we put through that door of opportunity through the usage of, great inclusive design to be able to solve very human problems at a very human level.
Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, a weekly chat with Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's chief futurist, and the builders, dreamers, founders, and wild children of the IoT universe. This podcast can also be viewed on the Coffee with Mr. IoT YouTube channel.
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. I am Deloitte's chief IoT technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. Welcome to our weekly YouTube and now podcast show, Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, my guest is Joanna Pena-Bickley. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. You work at Amazon and you are their head of research and design now for Alexa devices.
I am. I spent my first 2 years there as the head of design for the Internet of Things at AWS and have recently taken the expanded role of taking on research and design for Alexa devices. So it's an amazing space. I feel like a child in a big sandbox with lots and lots of toys. But it was one of those opportunities where you say there isn't often a distinction between IoT, whether it is for business or consumers. I think often we place a pretty big false one there. But the beauty of this is being able to really give both vision, but more importantly, representing the voice of the customer in our devices as we move forward.
I kind of like when I hear you talk about in a sandbox of toys. I almost want to come to your home and see what toys you get to take home. Do you get to take some of the toys home?
We do get to take some of the toys home. I do myself a favor because as somebody who is really excited about the work that we do, I try not to. Because I would be the first to leak something. That would be the worst idea for me to do. So I do spend a lot of time in our design studio in Sunnyvale, really working with all types of designers who range from industrial design, right? So the actual device itself, all the way to VUI designers. And then the researchers, the brilliant researchers who not just cull through all of the data, right, that we get from customers, but more importantly, actually go out and talk with customers at events just like this.
So you say at events just like this, we're going to air this a couple weeks down. We are at reInvent. It's your annual conference. What does reInvent mean for you?
reInvent for me means opportunity. I think it's often an opportunity to see what many of the other teams at AWS have been working on and cooking up throughout the year.
Oh, you get to see what other teams do.
That's correct.
You come here for that.
That's correct. Sometimes we come here for that, but I think the more interesting part of it is listening to our customers and our partners and our developer communities who are here really trying to explore and get their hands on the latest and greatest ML, IoT, compute, cloud storage, you name it, any kind of technology that we're putting out that inevitably solves one of their core business problems. So the first part of this is often the first opportunity you get once a year to come in and hear how customers are taking a path in their journey through digital transformation. The second part of it is then what are the hurdles that they face in doing those transformations? Because we know no two transformations look the same. Just like no two companies are the same. They can be in the same industry, right? But they often face very, very different problems. And so to be able to sit down with customers and apply both design thinking, but design doing to their problems and with their customers is always my favorite part of this event.
Hey, when I prepared for our interview, I looked at your background and I don't even know where to start. I have all these little threads I want to pull in, but let's just talk about reInvent a little more. Let's just make people sort of get excited for next year's because they're going to hear it afterwards. What did they miss here? What were some of the things that you were really excited about seeing at reInvent, or what did your group introduce Obviously, we can't talk about the future, but we can talk about the today.
We can talk about the today.
What's the big things that you want to make sure people didn't miss about reInvent here this time around?
Absolutely. So once they're done watching this video, they'll be able to go to the reInvent videos we posted.
That's awesome.
And some of the exciting things that I think that are some pieces are really what's happening in IoT. I think IoT and ML, while
ML, machine learning,
right, and AI and all of the artificial intelligence recognition, right. This is both voice and visual recognition. Those core properties and services are continually getting more democratized as time goes on. And so what's really exciting to me is to actually see the customers that are attempting new and inventive experiments with these technologies. Particularly, actually, some of the most sexy work is going on in the industrial IoT place. And it goes, industrial, how could that be sexy? It's like factories are sexy. They work in a really interesting way. And what people don't realize is when it comes to manufacturing, that most manufacturing companies' intellectual property sits within their manufacturing processes. And so when you look at how do you begin to connect those processes, make them more intelligent, how do you augment the human experiences on a manufacturing line, those to me are super exciting things. And we've got a number of product launches that we are doing within the IoT group that'll actually make that even more easier and a little bit more democratized for people who don't have command of the command line. And that's the interesting thing to me, is that we're seeing a new set of makers come to the forefront in the industrial IoT space, where traditionally IT has been kind of the ruler of IoT. We have swung the pendulum, and what we are seeing is a new base of users in OT, the operational technologies of companies. So when you start to observe the behaviors and the processes of how a company works, it becomes a really exciting feat as a designer, because what you realize is that they don't necessarily have all the tools available to them today that they need to complete their transformation. And so much of the work that is being launched today, and that was main stage with Andy Jassy yesterday, in his keynote, were so many different kinds of technologies that make it way more easier for somebody who is a builder, just a different kind of builder, right? Gain access to these really important technologies that in effect is, getting to a place which is really exciting, which is in the enterprise space around institutional wisdom. How do you begin to not just have random acts of digital in the transformation, but where you see systemic change within a company? And so the more that we can design products that not only suffice for the advanced user of a developer, but also the person who's never written a stitch of code, is a super exciting place to be.
So you talk about code moving much more into descriptive languages, sort of like plug and play, moving stuff around. Is that the stuff you talked about? And giving that to operational technologies?
Absolutely. One of the things we actually launched last year was a phenomenal tool called ThingsGraph. ThingsGraph was our first real invention at putting together a visual programming language that anyone could utilize a drag and drop surface and canvas to actually connect the real world. I always looked at it from the perspective of, the architect has a blueprint in commercial real estate, and then you have the mechanical engineers have blueprints, and so do the electrical engineers. And so ThingsGraph of IoT. Yeah. And so when you think about it from that perspective, you say, okay, this is now the IoT blueprinting service that allows someone to come in and orchestrate big connectivity at scale. Right. And I think the important part of this is the at scale piece, because so much of IoT at this point in time, we're in the middle of, another industrial revolution. We're some companies are at the nascent stages. Some are a little bit more progressed, but the ones that are really exciting to me are the ones that are in the nascent stages, because so often what you see is that what they have done is created a prototype, right, of what the transformation might look like. But the challenge is scale. right? And scale means the complexity of interoperability within systems. And so the first step in doing that was understanding that there weren't necessarily all the tools that people needed to hit that scale and to connect it with that much ease, and do so in a way that shortened the time to market, right? So if we think about one of our largest design goals is, working with customers to understand that today it might take them 6 months. If I can shorten that to 3 months, and then if I can shorten it to 1 month, and then to, weeks, we're getting into a space of helping them reach those transformations in ways that actually impacts their bottom line.
Yeah, scale is fascinating, right? Because I always joke that you can buy a Raspberry Pi for cheaper than the actual pie you can eat. Mm-hmm. And you can connect 10 users easily with all the tools that are available for free, but it's never going to scale to what you and I talk about when we talk about a smart factory.
Absolutely.
I love that you use the factory as a good playground. I spent my last 2 years on the factory with Factory Floor. We actually have together announced the smart factory fabric that we work on together. So it's really interesting. And you talked about IT and OT. How do you experience when IT and OT meets? Because to me, it's been a fascinating process to watch these two groups kind of eye each other and how they mingle and so forth. What's your experience been around that?
My experience in IT and OT is that it's often I equate it to the way that designers and engineers need to meet, because so much of the OT process is design driven. Whether you are manufacturing a car, you're manufacturing a toy, you're manufacturing food, often there is a scaled process in there, and they are actually creating a product for the world to consume. And what I have found, which is exciting, is there are kind of like 3 flavors of where these things come together. The first one is where they're actually creating their own connected device. The second one is where they're connecting up their processes. And then for a little bit more mature customers, where they may have already done both or one or the other, it is where they are actually trying to get institutional learning out of that data that is coming off of those machines. So what becomes really interesting in that cultural shift is that data is the thread that now files through them. Design, you're saying, does the need for design working its way back to IT and the understanding of design thinking. But at the flip side, the need and understanding for code coming into the operational space is super important too. And I think that's why we're starting to see an explosion of opportunity in many of our customers, where they're looking to hire designers and developers, where they're sitting on agile teams, creating new connected devices, or what they're doing is taking that same mentality and applying it to their processes. The exciting part of the process piece of this is that we often hear, I think, a tremendous amount of media attention around automation. And what I have observed is that the vast majority of companies are actually taking a much more humane approach to this. And it is one where they're trying to augment the human abilities of their factory worker, right? Here is an automation engineer who wants to place on, X-ray vision, right? Have the capability to see the data in the warehouse in context of the real world, and try to be able to predict, right, what is going to happen next in that real world. And a phenomenal example of this is that in observing many of these automation engineers, often they weren't using data. You would have walked through them. They'd been in the factory for 30 to 40 years. Someone who had been in it, whether an electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, and their job wasn't to be sitting in front of a screen. Their job's to be actually ensuring that each part of the process was maintaining a sense of quality. And so if there was going to be a variance in temperature in a particular room, if there was going to be a variance in the speed of a machine, it could throw off millions of dollars in terms of products. So to be able to see those everyday behaviors of what the expectation of the role of that individual is in there, and then look at it from the design thinking perspective of how might I help this person, right? Because today there's a little bit of data, and part of that data is I hear the whirring of this machine. That's a data point that they would use to say, this is about to break. And what is exciting now is to be able to augment that that intelligence in a way that says, I can stand, and look at the floor and get that sensibility, that same sensibility as I was walking through. So I think one of the key pieces that as we look at automation is that some parts of it, factories have been automated for a very long time, since the last industrial revolution. That part of it isn't new. It is when you start to put these machines connected to each other and they begin to intelligently speak to one another or offer better human intervention in these processes to make them more efficient, to make a better product, and to kind of help realize some of those Six Sigma goals that all manufacturers have placed on themselves, is a super exciting time to be in this space as a designer and somebody who watches human behavior.
It's interesting. You started this by saying they walk around and they are not used to be using data. And my first thought was, well, their data isn't digital.
That's right.
Their data is analog, it's sound, it's visual. And now we actually can give them the same data, if you wish, but just digitally, right? Because we can listen to it now. We can convert what we hear into stuff, and then we can, to zeros and ones, right? And then we can ask them, hey, we see this in the pattern. Right. Is this what you actually hear? And what does that actually mean?
That's right? Exactly right.
And the same thing is true now for visual, which is really fascinating. I don't think we think often enough when we think of IoT as cameras, as sensors, when very much whatever we can see today as humans, we can actually act on as a computer. So first of all, I looked at your LinkedIn, and it's one of the more fascinating LinkedIns. You have a really colorful history. But one of the things that's consistent throughout is it's very often about experience and the user's experience, the worker's experience. And you talk also in your LinkedIn profile about IoT experience, create an experience and not talk too much about the technology. Give me a little bit of an idea. What does that mean for you? What's a good experience for IoT? And what are you thinking we're doing today that we can improve to really make IoT accessible to everybody?
Sure, absolutely. I think that if we had anything to learn from where we are at IoT and maybe where we have been, I'm not only an inventor and a designer, but a student of history and someone who believes in trying to learn from the mistakes of the past. And so when you approach things from a systems design place where you go back in history immediately and say, well, how did we get to other industrial revolutions? How did we get where, to a place of where we invented the spinning jenny, or, we look at the ability to look at like the Model T being, and the assembly line. And then what does that mean in this industrial revolution, and what is the impact on humans? And for me, that golden thread has always been magic. And I say that in actually a very magical place. If you haven't gone to see David Copperfield, it's always a good examination in the magician's place of where technology and magic come into conjunction with these places, and has always existed. In that if a technology becomes so about a technology, you actually miss the magic of the value that it is providing. And so much of where we are today is truly a magical place. And that, when I think a little bit about, where we are just in mobile technology, the fact that I can, at the flip of my wrist, can only just tell time, but actually see my home. Or to be able to give me insight into something that's about to happen, right? Or just that reminder that you needed to get to the next appointment on time. All of those things have a sensibility of magic tied to them. I think often we take them for granted. And we have raised the expectations of users really high. This phenomenal saying that while I was working at IBM was very true, and I think even truer now, that the minimum expectation of an experience that you expect is really like the last best experience you had. And then that raises the bar for everything. So that doesn't matter whether it's in the enterprise, right? You don't go to work going, ooh, I really want a bad experience in my job in accounting. Nobody ever says that. But somehow we allowed experience to move out of the enterprise and never took that into account. When we think about it in our homes, the experience of privacy, security, what that means to people when we talk about IoT is a really super important one to me. But I think the other part that excites me about where IoT is now in business is that we actually have an opportunity to live a larger goal. One that I think is often stated by Jane Jacobs, who's a phenomenal architecture, brilliant aficionado, who wrote The Death and Life of American Cities and talked about systems design, or even somebody like Bucky Fuller, where the goal was, how do you get the world to work for 100% of humanity? And so much of the work that I do today is really thinking about inclusive design. How do I do it not just in a way that creates new systems for the factory worker, but that doesn't disenfranchise the factory worker from actually accomplishing the job that they were hiring to do? And so it's putting a little bit of that soul into the purpose behind so much of the technology piece. If you look at the works of like Le Corbusier, right, we could debate the utopian futurism of Le Corbusier in the early 1930s, right? And say this was about systems design and machines working. But if you really study the text, it was about machines for machines rather than humans working with machines or having machines work for them, right? In a space where that's where I think Jane Jacobs and Bucky Fuller really tried to say that humanity was often wasteful in their energy because we were always getting caught up in redundant tasks that machines could get rid of. And we could actually solve things like climate and cancer and like that if we were to focus on some of the harder problems that are in front of us. And so what I think design has an opportunity to do is actually play an enormous role in making sure and determining that the humanity is brought into a machine-to-machine world. And that there's still a role for humans in a world where two machines can intelligently speak together, make a decision, and then move on. And I think that's the space where I get super excited where we end. And I think I'm able to draw upon so much of the communications background that I had, whether I was, in journalism or playing in the marketing space, to the space of right now, which is pure invention. Right? I feel like I've gotten to do this full circle in my career, which was I started out inventing things. And by the way, you never set out to this. You go and you get a degree in journalism. You go, I'm going to be the next Barbara Walters. And you go, no, I'm going to be the next Einstein. And that's where you kind of go, oh, I'm going to actually be more like Doc Brown in Back to the Future. So for me, this trajectory has brought me to a space that's been full circle. But in that space, there have been three consistent things for me: magic, right? And the belief that design's role when it comes to technology is to ensure that there is that human emotion that is tied in and that there is underlying purpose and good in the intent in what we do. The second part of it is decoding tech talk for business executives, right? Demystifying the ones and zeros into how does it turn into more zeros at the end of a bottom line. And then that third part around that is the purpose-driven piece of it, right? Taking where we believe that technology can actually play an important, more purposeful role in our lives, rather than just connecting us everything to everyone, which we believe, I think, where IoT will be in the next 25 years. But the implications of that, what does that mean? And does that mean that the world begins to work a little bit better along the way for folks that have been disenfranchised in previous industrial revolutions.
I love the word magic. And so I think it really highlights one of the things that is often forgotten when we talk about value. We talk about how much money someone saves or how much more can be produced. And at the end of the day, I don't know about you. I don't go to work for that part. I go to work for the magic part. I go for the work for the emotional satisfaction. And sometimes we forget that. So thanks for the reminder on that. I often actually wonder, when are we going to stop calling it the Internet of Things? We never had the Internet of People.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sort of like we never called it that. So when are we going to call it the Internet again? But what I want to ask you for closing is, you talked about a lot of futurists and what they said. I'm actually curious, what future does Joanna paint? If you'd have to paint the future for me, what would that look like?
Oof, that's a good one, particularly in the times that we live in today.
You can paint anything here. I'd really be curious. And the reason I ask you this is because I think that actually influences how you lead your team. I think it influences how you lead a lot of things. So I'm really curious, what's the futuristic view of the world for you?
Absolutely. The futuristic world for me really does ride in a place of attempting to bring access and opportunity to more people. At a time when we live where, we have social upheaval, we have economic upheaval, we have ecological upheaval. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting time to be a designer in a place where you know that the work that you do has greater purpose. And for me, it is bringing a little bit more justice to the unjust, right? It is, for me, bringing more kindness to the world and being mindful of the world that we live in. Some of the work that has been so rewarding in the last year has been in the area of inclusive design. So much of the work in design that I do today is so focused in the inclusion and ensuring that inclusion isn't some check mark that I'm doing, but that I have disabled designers on my team, that I'm not designing for them, I'm designing with them. And I think that's such a real big difference when we talk about so many people in previous industrial revolutions and history have been left out of the table of power. Design's a very powerful table. So is that engineering table. When we come together, we're incredibly powerful. So when you look around the table and you realize there isn't someone of a different color, or if everybody looks like you got a problem. So much of the work that I do today is ensuring that through the recruitment process that we are open-minded and living our best values at Amazon when we are doing the recruitment. The other part is that we are designing with each other, with underrepresented voices, whether they be from the disability community, the LGBTQ plus community, women of color, bringing them to a table because what they offer is a very different perspective. And then when they are given the opportunity to leave, they invent way different things than we will invent. And often what I found in the disability community is that we completely over-engineer some of our designs that are for disabled people, when in fact they come to the power with superpowers that their disability has given them. And their inventions are simple and actually the very definition of magic. And so for me, so much of what the future looks like is not just painting a vision of what it means for the next 100 years, but how many people can we put through that door of opportunity through the usage of, great inclusive design to be able to solve very human problems at a very human level. And so for me, that's where, I get super passionate because that is the magic of the future, is really providing services with other humans of all of their abilities. And so much of the work that I do is ensuring that women and women of color have the same opportunities that I did. And so that this year is actually one of the most exciting years. In 2020, in 19, we beta launched. In 2020, will be a full-on launch. But the 3 generations of designers in my family, which began with my mother, who comes into the place of interior design and architecture and construction. Myself, technology and design and human experience. My daughter, who is in entertainment and in theater, does theater design and stage design work. We have come together to actually formulate a foundation. And that foundation is all about funding, using our privilege, and now funding the educations of underrepresented voices in technology and design, really rethinking the future in a STEAMD, STEAMD, right? That's science, technology, engineering, the arts, which is still incredibly important, right? Math and design. Because if we want to maintain magic for all, we have to ensure that all have the opportunity to get educated, to see themselves in leadership. Because the biggest part of what holds us back in communities of color or underrepresented communities is often that so much of the history of women in design or women in technology isn't well told or is erased or left out of history books. And so much of the foundation will be, number one, shining a light, giving the dream, right? Ensuring that that 12-year-old or the 7-year-old little girl from San Antonio, Texas, who is dyslexic and Mexican and comes from a middle-class background, has the opportunity to actually not look at a career in the arts or design as a risk, but as a career opportunity. Because so many first and second generation immigrants come to the country and they say, well, you get, kind of one of three things you could be. You could be a teacher, you could be an engineer, you could be a doctor. And really the fourth one is don't disappoint us. And the don't disappoint us comes from a place of there's so much risk that is seen. And it's, it's more theorized risk because you don't necessarily always see the artistry in design or in technology, people that are reflective of those communities. So the work that we have in front of us and the future that we hope to architect together with so many different people is, we were given significant privilege to get into places of power. Now it is time for us in our careers to actually pay that forward to ensure that the next generation gets to participate equally.
Well, thank you for a magical conversation. I really appreciate it. I rarely ever get the chance to talk through tech conferences and then privilege and something as personal as you shared with us. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you for allowing me to do it.
Thank you.
By the way, the organization is called, I can't believe I forgot this part, designedbyus.org.
Designedbyus.org. And with that, we have another coffee chat coming to an end. Thank you for watching. If you missed any of today's show or previous shows, please check out our playlist. And with that,
Thanks for listening to Coffee with Mr. IoT. To subscribe or to listen to more episodes, search for Coffee with Mr. IoT in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at deloitte.com/US/Coffee with Mr. IoT. To watch the video version of our show, go to YouTube and search Coffee with Mr. IoT.